you just disobeyed. Dallied. Okay.
So you should hear that one too.
Everybody's ringing your bell.
All right. So where do we go from here? What is your question?
I'd like to know more about what the word prajna means and
Prajna.
how, what order. My understanding is that it's kind of what allows you to discern between confusion or delusion and what's not confusion and delusion. So, is that accurate? And is everything we do to try and develop that, or is there specific things that you do to focus in on that?
Well, first, your general description, kind of a discerning capacity. That's certainly one of the ways, one of the aspects that's emphasized in prajna. I think there are other people here who know this better than me.
It's Cheryl, right? Share it well.
Yes,
Cherub.
with Cherub.
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 Yeah.
And Gianna is Ish.
Yeshe, yeah.
So the discriminating wisdom.
Yeah.
Is it related to the same one as the six perfection wisdom?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so you've heard of the six perfections, like that we practice generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom. So that's a discriminating kind of wisdom, sometimes described in so many ways, but one of the very basic ways for us to end suffering is to distinguish what leads to end of suffering, what leads to more suffering, that kind of discriminating wisdom. And then they're called perfections because of the truth, the ultimate truth, which is embedded in everything, which is the same as the Mahamudra, Great Seal. What everything is sealed with is that it appears, yet it's empty of any solid, separate, empty of the things we throw onto it and make it into a problem. So, but I'm curious why you're asking. Did you run into something that led you, or?
I guess I'm asking because as I go through my life, like when I'm come up with a new idea, I have to kind of go, okay, now how do I decide with this new idea? Is this going towards happiness or going towards, or is it delusional, Mm-hmm. And so, so kind of I guess that's where kind of looking more and getting more of a sense as to what that prajna was and, how to feel it more.
Yeah, well, just the intention and the noticing is the good beginning practice. And maybe it's everything. I like to just call it discriminating wisdom. And that can function on so many levels. Even right in your calm abiding practice. So you're in calm abiding, thought pops up. Discriminating wisdom can help us go, well, my discriminating wisdom is telling me that that's a good thought and I better follow it. That could be delusion. But if you actually thought, my mind's very, very busy and kind of dark today, so my discriminating wisdom might lead me to do a contemplative, analytical meditation instead on loving kindness or on precious human life. If it's a decision, rather than I'm just swept away.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's functioning all the time, except when we ignore it and cover it and throw it away and turn away and yeah.
Is it related to the word rigpa? Is that at all in the same realm?
No, it's
different.
Not in the same family, really.
Yeah. Okay.
I was just checking here some.
Family. Cousins, but second cousin. No, just kidding.
Yeah, getting to Prajna or Shira does have this aspect of discriminating wisdom, discerning, and but it has more dimensions to that, and that's the thing that I would want to refresh myself on, because it can arise in our ordinary mind, dualistic mind, where we discern what's helpful and what's not helpful, and you said, what do we do to increase that? And that's a good question. And we always go back to the three wisdoms: hearing, contemplating, meditating. So to the extent that we can get hints about, generally speaking, what enlightened beings have found to be helpful and not helpful, we can check in on that. We can contemplate those things and really see how it applies in our own mind. And then in meditation, we can actually refine our capacity for awareness. And so then at some point, the discriminating of wisdom is not arising in the dualistic mind. But this is where then it goes over into basically more the territory of Rigpa, or primordial awareness, or Yeshe. So it's a gradual, for most of us, it's a gradual process of deepening our discernment. And one of the terms for meditation in Tibetan, Gom, translates as familiarization, so familiarizing ourselves with our mind. So you could say the familiarization process is how we refine this.
So let me just say one thing that has confused me as I study, and still does sometimes, and maybe it's just too obvious for all of you, but one of the things that makes this sometimes harder to get through is we have 3 words for everything: English, Tibetan, and Sanskrit. So sometimes we're a little lost in that, prajna being the Sanskrit. Yeah, but it's not a whole different concept. Just different words. Yeah, so that prajna, sharab, discriminating wisdom. Then with Rigpa, it's Rigpa Yeshe.
No.
No.
Yes and no.
Yeshe, no.
It's a different word. Rigpa is Tibetan.
Yep.
And Yeshe is Tibetan.
Yeah.
So those are
Two different kinds of wisdom
different words.
for different types, different levels, different aspects.
No.
No, it's just a Tibetan word.
Okay.
Yes.
Go to the
tell us.
dictionary. Yeshe, being wisdom, translation of Sanskrit jhana, jhana has many meanings, but it's important to note it has an overall sense, which is just the basic idea of knowing, a direct knowing. So it's not the discriminating processing. Of the many connotations in the original Sanskrit, the one used by the Buddha was a very literal one, and one which is close to the overall sense of the word. The sense he used was, quote, the most basic knowing that there is. So this is Yeshe, jhana, the most basic knowing. Jnana. Jnana. Yes.
Jnana is
Yes.
the pronunciation.
Jnana. Yes. Well,
But is that spelled with the J?
J-N.
And
Yeah.
it's
Jnana.
pronounced
Jnana.
sh,
Jnana.
kind of
Jnana. Jnana.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And
So
the other one, as long as we're
Is jhana,
jhana.
which is the Pali pronunciation of dhyana.
Okay. Yes.
Meditation.
Yes.
That's not wisdom.
There won't be a test.
What's
Well,
Rigpa?
if there will be a test, but it's
But you have the rest of several lives to pass
Yeah.
it.
Rigpa.
Can you repeat those differences between the two? That
Just the
sounded
two. Let's
similar.
start with Yeshe or Jnana.
Yeah. Stand.
Jnana has many meanings, but it's important to note it has an overall sense, which is just the basic idea of knowing, the most basic knowing there is, just a very direct knowing. And then we go back to Sherab or Prajna, and that also is one of those Jnya, Prajna. Refers to the intelligent portion of a person's mind as like the intelligence, but is used slightly differently because intelligence is the general faculty of being able to understand using the intellect and can range from a very dull to very acute, whereas prajna means good intelligence, even if it is not strong. Wide range of use, though it is generally used to indicate the mental faculty of precise understanding. It can function in dualistic mind or non-dualistic mind. And this is where then, if I wanted to talk about it more, I would want to spend more time to be more precise about it. And really, in that, I would also have to have in mind an exact purpose for talking about it and being able to tie it back to our practice, not just what, if you look in a dictionary, what do you find? So in this case, the purpose of your question was how to continually, or how to continue to refine this discerning capacity. And the word that you were using for it was, in fact, the word for this discerning capacity.
But the word, so the yeshe, the jnana, is, that's the word, the wisdom word that we use when we say, enlightened mind has cherub and yeshe. So we have skillful means and we have wisdom, and those are, that's that's the, Yeshe is the one that's used with pairing compassion. When we say compassion and wisdom, or we say skillful means and wisdom, then it's Yeshe. And that's basically where our insight practice and our Mahamudra practice is meant to eventually land us in experiencing Yeshe.
And since you asked about, somebody asked about Rigpa, we'll just set that one up there. And probably don't need to say too much more than the first sentence here. This word has a huge range of usage in Buddhist traditions. And so you can, there are all kinds of ways. And so this even more so makes the case for you actually have to know why you're talking about this before you settle into, and then it's not just a language game of listing the 5 different ways that you could be using it, but it's. But a lot of it, in this case, one of the key things there was the aspect of see and vidya, being Sanskrit, which is actually related to our Latin, which is the source of the word video. So it's a...
But not limited to eye consciousness.
No.
And that
No.
can get confusing. When we say seeing appearances, we're also eye conscious. It means any appearance, touch, taste, smell, mental, all of them. Yeah. Much broader kind of seeing beyond those two.
Yes.
I actually wanted to, like, the question that I was planning on asking was sort of like a brief, like, explanation of the distinction between prajna and jnana, because I have noticed for quite a while that there's that same syllable in there, the J, the N, and the A. So I guess could you kind of give us like a quick like recap of like the distinction between those 2 words?
I think based on the conversation that we're having, the most useful distinction is between the discriminating capacity, that kind of the knowing that comes from clear understanding, and the more just basic knowing.
So jnana is more of a sort of a broader term.
I wouldn't call one broader than the other, except in the sense that the jnana or the yeshe, Sanskrit, Tibetan, that's the one that's just the more direct knowing.
Okay.
It's not an conceptual processing. The other one can have that aspect of conceptual processing.
Interesting, because I was always under the I interpreted prajna and sort of like from what I've read on prajna, the word I took it to be non-conceptual by nature, and that prajna really couldn't be in the context of conceptual conceptual thinking or
just
concepts.
Looking briefly here, it could be either, or it could be in either the cognitive processing or the direct, or arise within the frame of non-dualistic
interesting
perspective.
Right, because I always assumed that prajna was something that could only be accessed non-conceptually. Interesting.
No, that's not my. Do you have any further thoughts, Stan?
I just want to emphasize what you said before, that context is everything, particularly in Tibetan teachings, because these terms, they just percolate through all the schools and all the levels of teaching. And they mean completely different things in different contexts.
Yeah.
Also depends what you're reading, because I was reading now, it has prajna, different levels of prajna, listening, and so I don't know.
Oh, yeah. So sometimes you have to figure out your own personal context before you start reading stuff. How actually am I going to put this into practice? What am I going to do with this? Because if you don't do that, you could pick up 2 excellent books, and by the time you're done with the 2 of them, you're utterly confused. Because they are actually applicable in different frame of reference for practice. They might come from different traditions, but even within one lineage tradition, they could be looking at things so that you would apply them. So the application is a huge piece of the context.
I keep thinking about this, what this question raises, and the answers, and our various answers, and confusion, and the fact that Bill can look things up on Wikipedia.
No, it's my dictionary.
Oh, and his own dictionary. His Tibetan dictionary, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have this incredible karma right now to just have a cornucopia of teachings coming at us, probably in a way it's never happened in the world before at this level, because of our technology, because of our kind of smarts, being able to read widely, et cetera. And it's very confusing. And what I watch for myself with my own practice with it is to try not to get too swept away about this reading widely, and reading a lot, reading widely, reading another tradition, another one, and rather looking at my tendency to do that. I kind of like it, it's kind of fun, right? But then, and I think this is what Bill's pointing at, too, is we have to look at what's my situation, what's my capacity for practice, how much time do I have, what am I going to hone in on, which practices do I feel drawn to, and do I do them enough, because we can just get lost in the smorgasbord for sure. So it's something we just have to watch for in our current circumstances. We've got every kind of Buddhism coming at us at one time, very quickly.
Sure, yes. Yeah, yes, I do. Transforming adversity into the path of awakening. Discovering the heart of the path. the four dharmas of Gampopa. Navigating life and death. Opportunity in the six bardos. Green Tara empowerment, meeting the essence of the Buddha's protection.
So one question is, what are the six bardos? Because there are bardos in life and bardos in death. Is that the implication of those six?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth describing any of those? Can they be described at this point? I always envisioned like one bardo in death, maybe, and the bardo in life. Or bardo generally is transition in itself, just transition.
Actually, bardo itself is more like interval. So there are intervals where certain kinds of things are at sort of somewhat stable conditions, like the bardo of the waking state, the bardo of the dream, like that.
Sleep state.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned that we asked Rinpoche to speak on the six bardos, but we also asked him to talk about how we can help ourselves and others at the time of death. And so I think our request is leaning towards looking at the death and dying aspects, but knowing that those do come packaged in a traditional teaching is the six bardos, and that includes the dream state and the waking state. And so we'll see. But just so you know that we did ask, and we've told Rinpoche, we mentioned it also in a group interview in India, that we had, a group that was meeting regularly to discuss death and dying, and that's of interest in our Sangha, so he'll probably remember that, and so I imagine it'll emphasize that part of it.
Not necessarily the traditional structure of the bardo system. We won't need to know,
You won't need to know any of that beforehand.
But
if you were familiar with it, it's always
he'll probably
it's always richer.
He'll probably go through the six.
Yeah.
And the books have arrived, if you want to read several of them on the bardo.
One of the most, for me, one of the most interesting things just about the notion of the bardos is that we take our experience within the waking state as this kind of, this is the way, this is it, this is the whole shooting match right here. But then if we look at these other conditions, if you're in a dream, well, this is it. And it's not. There's not even a self-consciousness of, unless you really train to recognize the dream, and we usually recognize the dream in comparison to the waking state. Like, wait, this is usually after we wake up. But even if we recognize it within the dream, it's because we have so much history with the waking state. This isn't the waking state. These laws of physics are really funny here. So just the having an appreciation that our usual sense of how things are is really kind of stuck around some very particular things, and that one of the words, I was looking up some things earlier today, and one of the words about clinging, we talk about clinging or attachment, and one of the particular kind of if you sort of lean into that word and the range of meanings that there are within that in the Tibetan, the clinging has a kind of there's a kind of strong thread of meaning about sort of being sort of like stuck, or like fabric cling, that we're kind of stuck to this perspective. We're stuck to this kind of the lack of awareness. We're stuck to this dualistic perspective and taking it as real, kind of the stickiness of that. So the teachings on the bardos can have some they can open things up a little bit.
So, since there's 6 bardos, and there's like also 6 yogas of Naropa, are they related?
No, not like one for one. No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they both share in common the number 6.
So many numbers, and I'm wondering if they ever are associated with each other. But
yes.
Yeah, and I also know that there's like a yoga that's specifically dream yoga, while like there's a bardo that's dream, and I'm just like, so they're not connected in that.
Yeah.
They're just transition states, and then you can do these practices in dreams. Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the dharmas of Gampopa, right?
4 dharmas.
Yep, 4 of those. Yeah.
And unfortunately they're not the same as lots of other things that are listed for.
Right. It's grant your blessings so that my mind becomes one with the Dharma, and on from there. So I'm wondering, in the context of this teaching, since we've been talking about you need to know your orientation or your question or how you're going to apply it to practice, I think it would be helpful for me, maybe I just have to wait for the teaching, but I think it would be helpful for me to know how to apply these to practice. So I guess I understand, that this is maybe a type of map for how the experience of enlightenment unfolds over time, but how to use them. Yeah.
Part of the utility of a map in general is to help locate ourselves, and so within this, then to kind of help locate ourselves within our practice. And the 4 dharmas of Gampopa do talk about sort of an increasingly refined level from one perspective, you could say that. So then it's bless me that my mind turned toward the Dharma. You could say, how often do I need to remind myself, just get a clue, buddy. Just remember the basics. Just remember the basics. And without remembering the basics, I cannot actually do anything with it. So if I remember my basic outlook and the value of the Dharma, then there's its possibility that actually can become a path of transformation. I can actually do something. So in really engaging, when we just start to see those things, grant me your blessing that the path clarify confusion. This is then when we're really engaged in a sustained way, then to be able to more and more deeply see how confusion arises and how we can let go of it. The more we can take all kinds of circumstances to the path. grant your blessing that confusion dawn as wisdom. This one's the one where we're most likely not to have a clue what that means. But it's worth appreciating. Just if you just take it what it says, that confusion dawn as wisdom. It's very, very direct. So then if we have any idea about our usual experience, which is imbued with confusion, a non-recognition continuously, may confusion dawn as wisdom. That it's as something, it's the most simple possible. There are fewest moving parts. There are in fact no moving parts in the practice at that point, because you're actually not moving from confusion to something, not improving on something, moving from one thing to another thing. Yeah, there's no idea. That's a kind of a corollary of it. No idea of gaining, but it's being able to actually settle directly into experience without even the most subtle clinging to how it is that arises from an ordinary perspective. So I think having some appreciation for this, even if we don't actually have the means to really be actively practicing in a way that's no moving parts, we can appreciate even at the outset that our experience, whatever our experience is, whoever we are, whatever our life is, that there isn't any moment of it. There's nothing about what's arising in our life, in our experience, that is actually useless. That's to be kind of intrinsically just thrown away as bad. That it all has some basis for. It's all that could be the basis for deeper and deeper insight, and whether we go from just being reminded, our experience arising that reminds us that we should turn our mind to the Dharma. Good. Our experience arises, and then we actually start to develop discernment. In that discernment, we begin to practice more deeply, and so it goes like that. But at all points, the raw material of our experience in life is not. It's not like we have to get a new life in order to practice. The materials, right there. The raw material is always right there. And so in that, I think that can for me anyway, the moment that I actually kind of figured out how to take that seriously, I remember exactly where I was standing and what it was doing and what I thought at the moment. And I didn't have any kind of direct experience of this, but just figuring out the implications was highly transformative. And it shifted from a sense of aggression towards myself and aggression towards my experience to something that's like, it's like, back up, Bill. Don't become like, don't turn yourself into an enemy of yourself. Yeah. Don't fight like that.
Yeah. What's coming up for me right now is that how often I notice in myself or other people, and just that we try to change something, but we're just using the wrong means to change it. Rationally, we think we're doing something, and that this is the way to bring about a type of change. But I think, for me at least, sometimes there's moments where you see that's not the way that you're actually going to establish any change at all. That you need to change your viewpoint about it. But that's at least what's coming up for me right now. But thank you.
Yeah, for me, that's the fixing it. we do a lot of fixing, and it's too aggressive. You know, it's piling things on to the confusion quite often. But I have a question about what you just said, Bill. Okay, so transforming adversity, like those kind of mind training things, sound very similar to what you just described. So I want to hear you talk about, I know they're similar but different. Because as you said, when it's like confusion arises as wisdom, it's not a bunch of steps. But like, say, when I had cancer, eventually, after I did a bunch of steps with the Dharma, it did arise as a kind of wisdom. Maybe more the Sherab type, you know, the skillful means type. But can you just tease out those differences?
Transforming adversity. I think it just at each of the levels, you could say the transforming adversity, and then just look at all those different steps. Sort of, you could make them into discrete steps, and in terms of your experience with cancer, you could say at one level, a person could just kind of react violently against the whole situation, blaming the world and blaming everything, and then at some point recognize, actually, there must be another way. I should turn my mind to something that's effective. So just that step, and then okay, here I am in the midst of this. Then when the Dharma becomes a path, within that I can imagine there's the element of, oh, actually this is not, I'm not being picked on in a unique and completely unfair fashion in this. And so then it becomes a way, just looking at the Dharma, it becomes a way to kind of figure out how to navigate within that circumstance.
But would you call that confusion arising as wisdom?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
No. So then
that's transforming adversity kind of with a more conceptual, trying to move it way.
And so all the contemplations, and then as the contemplations begin to bear fruit, then the path clarifies confusion.
Okay.
So then we start to some fruit starts to arise from the processes that we engage in, say, with, as you use the example of mind training. When it gets down to confusion dawns as wisdom, then in any instant of the experience, the instant of just the raw pain, an instant of the emotional reactivity, any instant of that actually could be the ground for turning the awareness directly into the experience, as opposed to trying to do something with it.
Or trying to think something.
Or think something, or improve on it in any way. And then it's just directly at that point. It is actually it's the fuel of wisdom, whatever it is.
I mean, you see these, I see it, that at least that fourth one, as kind of descriptive of the third turning. Do you equate those? Because when we talk about the three turnings, and the third turning is the main method there, or characteristic is recognition. That's the word we use most of the time. So, but that's how I understand this confusion dying as wisdom, is that we're recognizing the true nature of experience in the midst of experience as it happens. and so it's pretty advanced.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, it doesn't
But
even
that's
have the,
where we
it doesn't have, even have the moving parts of we recognize it. That's,
It's not conceptual.
it's not conceptual. And so the practices that lead to that point involve looking at the nature of experience, the nature of appearances, looking at the nature of the awareness.
Who's got the mic? Oh. We're done.
Right? We are done. If you have something pressing, you can come up and we can chat.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, all right.
I just wanted to correct that. I think earlier when I was saying skillful means, I was saying, I went back to cherub. When I was trying to think of the Tibetan word for that, it's not cherub, it's top, I guess.
Yeah, top
Yeah, top.
method.
So, anyway, cherub is what we said before, and skillful means. But I was saying that when you pair skillful means and wisdom, yeshe and top, or skillful means.
Yeah.
T-A-P.
Yeah. Or B. All right. Now let us all remember the context of our practice and dedicate the merit of this discussion, that it may become useful in our practice and of benefit to beings. Virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you all again.